Good morning. I'd like to share with you the art progress that I made yesterday. I managed to ink about 5 pages, but first let me show you the comics I was reading last night. So I'm still making my way through the comics that I got on Free Comic Book Day, and here we have this year's edition of The Simpsons. Like many people, I was a big fan of The Simpsons, and it's a golden time. I guess the 1990s, maybe early 2000s, the first dozen or so seasons or so. And I still watch it occasionally. I'm probably a season or two behind. I suppose how do you say, binge watch the shows in the modern era. But anyway, the comics, at least from what I can tell from this entry, are interesting because they seem to focus more on the younger generation, Bart and Lisa. And because it is a comic, it has a little bit of a timeless feel to it, whereas the newer show is more contemporary in a way. What I'm trying to say is these comics feel more like the 1990s or the golden time of The Simpsons rather than the modern era, and they seem to focus less on Homer and more on the children. And of course, being a comic, this can focus on things which the show can't easily do. For instance, we can have a guest star just for a couple of panels, or have a situation which might require a whole episode. But in a comic, you can just kind of breeze through it. Anyway, so this one just had some short stories in it, and this is a lot of fun. It really reminded me of uh, some of the fun times that I had with The Simpsons. Uh, one element that I do want to mention is we have the aliens, Kodos and Kang, and at one point they speak in an alien language, and this appears to be a font. Now, I don't know whether this is a Futurama font. I believe they had a couple of writing systems, or whether this was designed just for the Simpsons comics. I really don't know, but I really like the design of it. For all I know, this could just be a cipher for English. And I do like how all of Cletus's children are mentioned by name. That's sort of a running gag in the show. I think they've given different lists for the children's names, and my guess is the author combined all of them together in one giant list. So we have Zoe and Chloe, we have Cubert, Gummy Sue, Mary, Not Quite Right Mary, and other fun names. Birthday, for instance. Anyway, Simpsons comics. Now, we also have Disney Princess comics. Now, Disney has a long history with comics. I think many of us are familiar with the Carl Barks comics of Scrooge McDuck and Donald Duck. And other Disney artists have worked on comics through the years, like Floyd Norman worked at Mickey Mouse at the end of its run. So this is a new type of Disney comic. This isn't the old style type. This is meant to. It's a new thing. The one thing I do want to bring up is the issue of art style. My guess is that Disney is taking many of its properties and trying to condense it into a single art style to appeal to young girls. Now, if you're familiar with the films, Snow White has a very different art style than, say, The Little Mermaid. Pocahontas has more realistic art style, and Sleeping Beauty has perhaps the most interesting and most intricate of all of the art styles of the classic films. And of course, some of these characters were CG designed. So I'm wondering what the imperative was. It was we need to crash them all into a single art style that sort of works. I'm uh, I'm not entirely on board with this particular art style. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but I've noticed that these stories are supposed to take place during the film, but Ariel has been youngified. She she looks more like a little girl, more like the target audience of this book. This, of course, has to be deliberate. I'm a little concerned because this does go against the idea of a mermaid story. Mermaids are supposed to be bridal figures in a way. I mean, in the original fairy tale, the Little Mermaid is old enough to leave her grandmother and father and find a husband and start a life with him. And so, you know, however the story is going to be retold, obviously she doesn't have a grandmother in this version. She should look old enough to get married and her own family. And we do see her in a bridal dress at the end, and they look far too young to be married. In the movie, they actually have the rainbow upside down. I don't know if that was just a design error. However, aside from the art direction, I do think that these comics were actually very delightful. I mean, it's a comic strip format, and like all comic strips, they are essentially haikus. Not all comic strips, but there's a nice pattern to it. One of these days, I think I'll bring out some Garfield comics and some Peanut comics, and we can talk about this haiku format. But whether it's 3 panels or 4 panels or a variation of that, we have, the setup, essentially the payoff, the punchline, and then the resolution, and it works with this pattern pretty much every time, and it makes each comic strip a satisfying short story because it is a satisfying poem. Now, when you put a lot of strips together as a single story, there is the tendency to sort of repeat this because we have to kind of set the story back up again. But most skilled cartoonists know how to work around that, and we've certainly had generations of Tarzan strips and the Shadow and the Phantom, and strips that know how to tell a long form story, but still in a comic book format. As for these comics themselves, they are delightful. They do what they need to do. There are a lot of puns, a lot of bright colors. They will appeal to kids. There are a lot of quotations and references to the films. It's a lot of fun, and I think it would appeal to children and people who are young at heart. I'm also making my way through Nausicaa. I read it years ago. No, I'm not entirely sure how this was published because it doesn't seem to break apart into chapters, so I basically just read it scene by scene. And it is worthwhile to look at this and think about the differences from the film. This seems a little bit, well, it is more bleak in a way. It is, perhaps not bleak isn't the right word. It is harsh in a way that, I mean the film is harsh too, but the film also has, the colors and the music to lift it up a little bit. One detail, which I don't believe the film has, is that Nausicaa was not an only child. She had 10 or 11 siblings, and the rest of them passed away as children because of the poisonous magic of this world, of this post-apocalyptic world. Anyway, it's the Miyazaki style is worthwhile to study. In this manga, it is very sketchy. They almost look like storyboards, the kind of refined storyboards, as to be expected. And I particularly enjoy the movement and the adventure. We will talk about Nausicaa more as it goes on. And anyway, I'm still working on this book, this parade of aliens, kind of a St. Patrick's Day of yokai and kind of a magical creatures. And yesterday, I believe, I showed you this page, and so we've got lots of aliens kind of cramped together. I'm just kind of being whimsical with their designs. And then here, kind of more some simple designs. This one is inspired from Where the Wild Things Are. and the parade is about to start, so everyone's excited. This page is very simple, but that's because when I paint it, there's just gonna be a lot of blue and crazy hair. And we finally get to the beginning of the parade. We have an alien piper, and he's got 4 arms and 3 legs, and so the bagpipe has extra pipes and things. And we've got people carrying the flags and tossing clovers. So we are halfway through the book, and finally the parade begins. And so these will be aliens carrying flags. I'll work on that today. And really the next 30 or 40 pages will just be aliens in a parade. Aliens, creatures, and other fun things. Alright, I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.